Right, this evening I'd like to address the question of the truthfulness of God, as truth is an integral part of the very character of God Himself. And I think one of the best ways to start this is to turn your attention to the Gospel of John, to an episode that I'm going to read from the trial of Jesus as He is before Pilate. We read in chapter 18 of John's Gospel, beginning in verse 37. Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Now here, in His moment of trial, Jesus says before this authority, the reason why I came to this world was to bear witness to the truth. And we know just a few chapters earlier, Jesus had gathered with His disciples in the upper room, and He had talked to them about different things, and He said on that occasion about Himself, I am the truth. And so now He's saying to Pilate, the whole reason why I'm here is to bear witness to the truth. And then He adds to it this, everyone that is of the truth hears my voice. Boy, what an outrageous statement that would be if it's not the truth. Can you imagine if I came in here as a teacher and said, hey, all I'm concerned about in these lectures is to bear witness to the truth. I'm only interested in speaking the truth, and by the way, I am the truth. And also, incidentally, if you don't agree with what I say, that's because you're not of the truth. I mean, you'd pick up stones, wouldn't you? I would hope you would. You'd say, I dismiss this lunatic from your midst, that if I began to talk like that. But this is how Jesus speaks to Pilate. Now notice Pilate's response. Pilate said unto him, What is truth? And one of the disappointing things about the biblical record of events that take place in redemptive history, Old Testament, New Testament, both cases, is that so often only the facts are reported and people are quoted, but we don't get any further description about the tone of voice that was used, the way the person was looking when they utter certain statements. I would really like to know how Pilate asked that question. Was he being cynical? Was he mocking Jesus, saying, ha, what is truth? Or did he have a moment whereby he was sobered by the presence of Jesus and was being pensive and was asking a legitimate question, saying, well, what is truth? I don't know how he asked that question, what his attitude was as he stood there. But do you note the irony? That here is the representative of the Roman government asking the question, what is truth? When the truth was standing right in front of him. And Pilate didn't understand that. The truth was incarnate before him, and Pilate missed it, although he didn't miss the truth altogether. Notice what he then goes on to say. He said, What is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again into the Jews and said unto them, I find no fault in him. That was the truth. If ever a man spoke the truth, Pontius Pilate spoke it on that occasion when he said, I find no fault in him. Why do you suppose Pilate couldn't find any fault in Jesus? I think it's pretty easy, isn't it? It's extremely difficult to find something when it isn't there. He could have spent the next 50 years interrogating Jesus and still have not been able to find any fault in Jesus. This was the Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God, the Lamb without blemish, who had stood before his own accusers and said to them, "Which of you convicts me of sin?" And none of them stepped forward to do that. But the question that Pilate asked is one of the most important questions that anybody can ever ask. What is truth? And beloved, we can hardly take for granted in this day and age that there's an easy answer to that question. Because that question is at the heart of controversy that divides this nation and that divides this world right now. What is truth? Most of you remember that in his later years, Francis Schaeffer used to talk about true truth. Do you remember that? True truth. Why do you suppose Dr. Schaeffer spoke about true truth? Do you think it's because he stuttered? I mean, to say true truth is like talking about squarish squares or circular circles or beautiful beauty. It's redundant to say true truth. But Francis Schaeffer was not trying to be redundant. He was not trying to be cute. He was trying to say that when he was bearing witness to truth, that the kind of truth he was talking about was a truth that is objective. Now let's take a few moments here and ask this question: how does the Bible understand truth? We can examine the Greek word that is used in the New Testament, aletheia, and look at it. We can look at the Hebrew word emut, which also corresponds to the New Testament word, and we see that the concept of truth in the Bible is multifaceted. In the first instance, truth, according to the Bible, is that which is objective, not subjective. Now, we live in a culture that, for the most part, is understanding truth in subjectivistic ways. Let me illustrate with my favorite illustration. If you've heard it before, be patient. Talked to a college student about the existence of God, and the college student said to me, "If you believe in God, R.C., and find that faith meaningful, then for you, there is a God. But I don't feel the need for God. I don't feel the need for religion. I don't find any meaning in religious activity. So for me, there is no God." And I said to the student, "But you don't understand the God that I'm talking about. I'm talking about a God who exists apart from me and apart from you. A God who exists objectively. A God who's really there. It's not just a projection of my imagination or of my personality. Here's the kind of God that we're talking about. I'm talking about a God that if He doesn't exist, all of my faith, all of my prayers, all of my obedience, all of my worship, all of my Christian service cannot conjure Him up if He's not there. And by the same token, the God that I'm talking about is so objectively real that if you don't believe in Him and don't find Him meaningful and are not turned on by Him, all of those factors put together will not destroy Him. Because we're talking about objective truth. Now, if we examine, as I say, the biblical word for truth, one of the definitions that we discover in the lexicons is that truth in the Bible refers, quote, to real states of affairs. Not personal preferences, but to reality. Now, in philosophy, we could call this one version of the correspondence view of truth. Now, in simple terms, the correspondence theory of truth teaches that truth is that which corresponds to reality. Whatever is real is true. And whatever is true is real. There's a correspondence between truth and reality. But here's where the philosophers raise the question. They say, wait a minute. Truth is reality as perceived by whom? Remember how famous Howard Cosell got with his line? Tell it like it is. He was calling for an objective view of reality. But not everybody agreed with Cosell's perspective on reality. And so really, when Cosell was telling it like it is, he was saying what? This is how it is as Cosell sees it. Now, does Cosell ever make a mistake in his perception of things? I'm not sure that Howard Cosell's perception of reality always corresponds to reality. And so it's not good enough for us to say that truth is that which corresponds to reality as we perceive it. But the Christian view of truth goes another step. And it says this, that truth is that which corresponds to reality as it is perceived by God. That God is not only the source of all truth, but He is the great perceiver. That God's understanding of the world, His understanding of you, His understanding of the universe is without flaw. He understands it comprehensively. He understands it with total precision and with total accuracy. There is no error in the mind of God in His understanding of objective reality. That's good news. It's good news when you come before His judgment throne to know that you're never going to be victim of ignorance, of a mistake. It's good news when we come to the Scriptures and wrestle with the question of their reliability as we consider the source of the Word of God. But I think everybody's aware that the God of the Bible is identified with truth in this objective correspondence way. But what we often overlook, that in the Bible, truth refers to a lot more than simply an accurate picture of reality. That another dimension of truth that we have to learn is that truth is personal. Truth is not merely abstract. Jesus didn't simply say, I tell the truth. He said, I am the truth. And we say that God is truth. We're saying that God Himself is a person who can be trusted. That's the personal character of truth. Do you have any idea how that relates to living out the Christian life? Christian people are called to be people of the truth. And that doesn't mean simply that we have a correct understanding of theology. That's important. It's not simply that we're to be in touch with objective reality, but it means that in our personal relationships, with each other that we can be trusted. You think about your life for a minute and think about the relationships that have been broken, that have wounded you, and the greatest pain that you have come from people whom you trusted and they let you down. What does that do to life? To have a broken relationship that is a result of a violated trust. And we hassle forever about the issue about divorce in the church. Jesus talks to the Pharisees, and they ask him about, is it okay to get divorced, and under what circumstances, and so on. And the theologians debate about this forever, and some Christians say, well, there are no grounds for divorce because Jesus says that in the beginning, in terms of God's intention for marriage, was there any grounds for divorce? No, there was never any design in God's plan for marriages to break up. But then sin came into the world. And Jesus said, because of the hardness of your heart, God condescends to give you an opportunity for divorce under certain rigorous conditions. What rigorous condition? When the trust of that relationship has been violated through infidelity. How many of you have children and they get in trouble and you scold them and you say, I can't trust you more, and they'll start crying, oh, please trust me, trust me, trust me. I want you to trust me, Mommy. It used to kill me when my parents would say, I can't trust you. And I would say, please trust me. But you know, you can't turn a switch and make a decision really to trust somebody. You can say you trust them, but to have a sense of trust in another person is something that takes a long, long, long time to establish. And 5 seconds to demolish. The God of truth is a God who never violates personal trust. The great difference between man and God biblically is that man is a covenant breaker and God never, ever, ever breaks a promise. But again, if we look further at this idea of truth as it mirrors the very character of God, we see that truth is not only personal and objective, but we also see that it is a verb. We are called to do the truth. And again, this has to do, it's very closely related to trust, it has to do with keeping our word. Now let me ask you this theoretical question. Suppose that Jesus came into this assembly tonight and we had an opportunity to ask him some questions and have him give us some teaching. We would all, we'd turn our attention and give him our undivided attention. But suppose he were unavailable and he sent his brother, his blood brother, who some have described as the first pope of the Christian church, the man who presided at the Council of Jerusalem that's recorded in Acts 15, the one who is called James the Just, or James the Righteous, whom we believe to be the author of the epistle to James in the New Testament. Now suppose the Lord's brother, James, walked in here and we had a chance to ask him. He said, James, I know you're only here for 5 minutes and we can't get the whole scope of systematic theology from you tonight, but boil it down for us. What are the real priorities of godliness? Your brother's not here to tell us. You tell us what you think is super important for us to live the Christian life. Do you know what he would say? I know what he would say because he said it. He said in the first place, the essence of true religion is this: the care of widows and of orphans. He said, if you love God, and you want to do the truth and be doers of the word and reflect the character of God, then you take care of the widows and the orphan, those people who are alone and who are helpless. That's who the God of truth makes a priority. And after James goes on in his book and expands all these themes, then he comes to this conclusion, and we let him hear it, say it as he comes in the door, where in his epistle he says this, and above all, then what's he say? If we gave 1,000 evangelicals that question, above all, I don't think you'd get 5 people who would answer that question right. I know they would say, above all, don't go to movies. Yeah, above all, do this, do that. Above all, he says this. Listen to what he says. Swear not by the heavens, but let your yea be yea, and your nay be nay. Imagine if James came in here and we said, what's the most important thing we should be doing as Christians? And he said, the most important thing you do is let your yea be yea and your nay be yea. And he turned around and walked away. We'll say, what kind of church does that guy come from? I mean, that's not what we learn as the top priorities of the Christian life. But what's he saying? He was probably there when his brother gave the Sermon on the Mount. When his brother said, don't swear by the heavens, for they are the Lord's footstool. And he warns about the swearing of vows and of oaths. Do you ever wonder why that's in the Bible so many times? Let's go back to its origins. In the Old Testament, God boiled down the laws that he wanted obeyed to the 10 most important commandments that he could give his people. I often say to my students in the seminary that if you had the opportunity to rewrite the Constitution of the United States, if we could start over from scratch, and you could only have 10 laws upon which to build a nation, how many of you would include in your top 10 a law against coveting, a law against slander, a law about honoring your parents? God did it. And how many of you would put in there this law, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for he will not hold him guiltless? Who does that? What does that mean? When God gave that law to Israel, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, God did not have in mind cursing, at least in the foreground. That's an implication that our speech should be pure and not blasphemous and so on. But the primary way in which that law is violated in Israel is by people swearing vows before God and not keeping them. Because to the Jew who worships a God of truth, whenever he would make a sacred vow, a solemn promise, he would swear by the integrity of God. And that solemn act of taking a vow and swearing an oath was a recognition that God is the author and the sovereign ruler over truth. In Israel, the taking of a vow and the swearing of an oath was regarded as an act of worship because it acknowledged God's sovereignty, his omniscience, his omnipresence, because we were recognizing that he was the supreme witness to the promise that we were making. And we were acknowledging that God cares about the truth. So what did the people start doing? They started fudging. They said, well, I'm not going to swear in the presence of God. I'm going to swear by the altar. I'm going to say, cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. I'm going to swear by my mother's grave. Talk about graven images. And what Jesus is saying is that to swear by anything less than God is to commit an act of idolatry. Because your mother's grave cannot be a witness to the truth. Your mother's grave is not omniscient. Your mother's grave is not the keeper and the fountainhead and the source of truth. And then Jesus, following the Old Testament pattern, tells us that the keeping of our promises is a sacred thing. Because God is a God of truth, we are to be people of truth. And what is James saying? He's saying, hey, when you say yes, you better mean yes. And when you say no, you better mean no. Let your yea be yea and your no be no. Now, how often do you hear that preached in the Christian community? I know Christians, listen to this, I know Christians who make pledges to their church every year and don't keep them. We're not doing the truth. I had a case not too long ago where a minister hired a man to do some work on his home, and the contractor said, I will be there next Tuesday to do this work. It was a small job. It was going to cost about $300. The next Tuesday came along. Contractor didn't show up. A few days later, the minister called the contractor and said, what happened? Where are you? And he said, I'm sorry. He said, I'll be there next week. He said, I couldn't come because at the last minute, another client called me with a big job that was a $15,000 job. The minister said, but you told me that you would be here to do this. You didn't say, I will do it unless something better comes along. But that's the way we do. But we're called to be people of the truth. And it's not enough to have a true theology. We're called to do the truth so that our word means something. So what higher compliment could you receive at the end of your life than to have somebody say, I knew that person, and the one thing about that person is I could trust them. How many people do you know that you can trust with your life? The only person I have ever met in my whole life who has never lied to me in any way is Jesus. Because he is the truth. Do you realize that our unbelief, when we stagger in our faith, that how insulting that is to God? What we're doing is that we learn from each other that words are not always to be trusted. And we project upon the character of God the same lack of integrity that attends our own word. Jesus said this, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds forth from the mouth of God. Why did he say it? Because he said something else. Thy word is truth.